Hello everyone and welcome to another WoW Classic video on the talent system. Today we're going to be talking about the Priest. In the raiding community, the Priest was a highly sought after asset, mostly because the Priest was widely considered as the strongest healer in Classic. Aside from that, if you were on Alliance, Dwarf Priests were especially sought after because of their fear word ratio that they learned at level 20. Let's start this video off by looking at the most commonly used priest spec for PvE. So this build you're looking at here is your basic holy tree for raiding. Depending on what your raiding team looks like, you could have this build ending up looking a ton different. There are 4 absolute must-haves regardless of how you play between holy and discipline with this build. The first of those is healing focus. This isn't going to be the absolute best for a raiding environment, except for in situations where there is constant raid-wide damage. But it is going to be required if you plan on doing any 5-mans. If your Fade doesn't drop aggro, then you're going to be very happy that you have this. The next of the required talents is Inspiration. This is just going to be very nice for your tanks and anyone taking physical damage, and a lot of your healing is going to be directed at your tanks. The third required talent is Spiritual Healing. It's straight up insane. It's going to scale with your gear very nicely as well. The last of the required talents is Inner Focus. This is arguably the most powerful ability you're going to be gaining from this build. Increasing your crit chance for your next spell by 25% is nothing to scoff at, but the 100% reduced mana cost is huge. There are so many different ways that we can use this skill both offensively and defensively. A lot of people will question why we don't have Divine Spirit as a requirement. For a raiding environment, yes, you do need this spell, but like I said earlier, it depends on how the other priests in your group spec. You only need one priest to have this talent. Spirit of Redemption is another talent that a lot of people may be questioning on not having spec'd into either, or calling for it to be required. Yes, it is nice to be able to have an extra 10 seconds of free healing if you do happen to die, but you really don't want to have to rely on this. If you're in a raid environment and you die, you're going to be less useful than if you're still alive, even with 0 mana. In a 5-man, all this talent is going to do is give your party 10 more seconds to finish the fight. Otherwise, it's more than likely a wipe. And if you don't have another member that can res you, you're going to have to run back anyways. The only time I could see this skill as being useful is if you're progressing through a fight and you're constantly dying right at the end of the fight and you just need that extra 15 seconds to be able to kill the boss. Not taking Spirit of Redemption makes it even easier not wanting to go all the way down to Lightwell at the bottom of the tree. Lightwell is a very unique skill, but it's also quite frankly a very bad skill. Your group has to be aware that it's down and you have to actively click on it to get a heal, and it only has 5 charges. It's just all around not that great of a skill. You'll notice that we didn't take Improved Renew, but we did take Improved Power Word Shield. In general, both of these skills are not very strong. Power Word Shield does not offer enough shielding for it to be efficient in its mana cost. And while Renew isn't bad in terms of mana cost, it's not very effective in a raid environment because of all the people being topped off by snipers. The only place where Renew can be useful is in a 5-man where you're the only healer. Whereas Power Word Shield can be used in some situations in a raiding environment as a proactive damage reduction right before a big hit from our boss. The fact that Renew has no benefits for raiding and Power Word Shield does have some uses in raiding is why we've taken Improved Power Word Shield over Improved Renew. The only other talent that we chose in this build that I want to point out is Holy Nova. This is a very fun skill and it actually can be useful in both raids and 5-mans. It's by no means required, but sure is a fun skill to have. Everything in this build is pretty straightforward. It's your usual reduced mana cost, lower casting times, and improved healing percentages. The next PvE build is going to be the Deep Discipline build. This build was more popular once you started to get more gear and your mana needs were not as high. It was also very popular when it came to guilds that were trying to kill bosses a lot faster once they had them on a farm situation. The absolute best skill you're going to have access to with this build is Power Infusion. While the mana requirement for this spell is quite high at 20% of your base mana pool, the buff itself is insane. The mages in your raid are going to be fighting over you for this buff if you actually go this build. Other than Power Word Infusion, we only have a few other small changes. We drop our single point from Spell Warding and the 10 points between Spiritual Healing and Spiritual Guidance in favor of picking up Mental Strength and Force of Will in the Discipline tree. While Force of Will and Mental Strength are great talents, we picked them up solely so we can get to Power Infusion. With the healing specs out of the way, let's take a look at the PvE Shadow spec. Let's start off by looking at the Discipline tree. We take Wand Specialization over Unbreakable Will because during progression raiding, there are a lot of fights where you're just going to have to start the fight off with just using your wand for DPS while the tanks build up their aggro. Not only that, this will also help you DPS when you run out of mana from going through your main progression of spells. The second tier is all things we've seen before. Some people may ask why we only have 1 point in Silent Resolve, and that's because there's some great choices that we have taken in the Shadow tree. Once you get more gear and mana is less of an issue, this is a talent you will want to consider putting 5 out of 5 in. Inner Focus, we've touched on before and why it's so great. Meditation is going to help us with our mana retention and just let us DPS for longer periods of time. Mental Agility is an odd talent here, but we do take it again because of something we are skipping out on in Shadow. This talent will only really help out with Shadow Word Pain and Shield, which is why we drop it later on when we have better gear. Heading over to the Shadow tree, there are 4 major talents that I want to point out. Firstly, Mind Flay. Just like the Shadow Priest has always been, Mind Flay is going to be your filler spell, so we need to make sure we pick this up. The second talent to note is Spirit Tap. The gain in Spirit itself will help us with our mana regen, even though it's not that much. Then the second effect from Spirit Tap just helps us with our mana regen even further. The third talent of note, again, is a spell that everyone who has ever played a Shadow Priest should be used to, Vampiric Embrace. The mana cost with this is super nice and low, and it'll be a nice benefit to your healers in your party. We don't do insane amounts of healing with it, but it's definitely going to be helpful in topping off party members. And the last notable talent is, of course, Shadow Form. There isn't really much to say about this skill. Anyone who's ever played WoW knows exactly what it is and what it does. The rest of the talents that we have are all the usual suspects: reduced threat, increased range, more damage, etc. The biggest question people usually have with this spec is why no improved Mind Blast? Remember when I said that we took slightly different talents in the Discipline tree because of something we didn't take in the Shadow tree? Well, that is improved Mind Blast. Improved Mind Blast is going to make you run out of mana a lot faster for extended fights, so it's not really optimal to pick up. Once you have enough gear where you're not concerned with mana nearly as much, it is a great skill to pick up. If we are building with that though, we also want to make sure we put 5 out of 5 in Silent Resolve. Those 9 talents we need, we're going to take them from Mental Agility, Improved Power Word Shield, and Improved Power Word Fortitude. Since we're looking at Shadow, let's take a look at the Shadow PvP spec. Before we get into this, I know if there are any expert PvP Shadow Priests out there, they will find some way to say that this spec is flawed. It can be argued that almost every Shadow Priest spec is flawed in some way or another. This is mainly because of every Shadow spec wants to get Shadow Form, meaning that we have to put a minimum of 31 points into Shadow, which leaves us with only 20 talent points for the other 2 trees. There are quite a few talents to touch on here, so we will work from right to left and just go over them one at a time. Improved Psychic Scream. This should be a no-brainer. This is going to be one of your best tools in PvP. Reducing the cooldown on it is going to be a huge part of our success in PvP. Silence is another no-brainer for PvP. Being able to silence any target is going to help you out in either securing a kill or even preventing a player from being able to kill you. Improved Vampiric Embrace. This is going to help you be able to just sit there and constantly cast spells on the target in hopes that you're going to be able to quote-unquote out-heal them throughout the damage they're inflicting on you. Shadow Reach is going to ensure that we're not going to get kited by the likes of a hunter. When your CC spells are on cooldown and you're going up against a ranged opponent, you're gonna need this talent. Blackout is kind of an obvious choice here. Just having the chance to stun while you're dealing your damage to the target can be the difference between life and death. This type of talent is also the classic type of talent we're used to seeing from these old talent trees when it comes to PvP setups. While healing focus may seem counterintuitive, it is nice to have. Even though we have improved Vampiric Embrace, there will be times when we need to pop out a shadow form to heal ourselves. When we do that, we really want to make sure that we can get those heals off as fast as possible and get back to DPSing. This is just going to help ensure us that we can get the shadow form faster. Improved mana burn is nice because it's going to deal damage and it's going to gimp your opponent if they're using mana. Remember how much we've preached about on this channel how important mana is? Well, imagine you cast 3 spells and then you're completely out of mana and you can't do anything. That's what mana does to your opponent. And lastly, Martyrdom. This is not only going to be great for reducing your total cast time of spells while you're being hit, but the 20% increased resistance to interrupt effects is amazing as well. The rest of the talents that we picked up throughout this build are your usual talents that you would come to expect. Next up is the Holy PvP build. This build is extremely similar to what we saw for the PvE build. The only difference is that in the discipline tree, we're going to drop Silent Resolve in favor of Martyrdom. We just touched on why we want that. We also make sure that we drop Mental Agility in favor of improved Shadow Burn and improved Inner Fire. In the Holy Tree, we drop Divine Fury and improved Healing in favor of Blessed Recovery and Holy Reach. You'll also notice that we actually have a point in Spirit of Redemption. Being a healer in PvP, you're often a high priority target, so being able to heal your allies for an extra 10 seconds after being killed can be extremely helpful in PvP, especially if you have a warrior that comes in and just wrecks house while you're spamming heals on them. Still, we don't pick up Lightwell though, because yeah, it sucks, okay? It's just a bad skill. And the last of the priest builds is the PvP discipline build. In terms of the Holy Tree, the build is identical to what it was for the PvE spec. The reason for keeping improved healing over the other talents that may be more beneficial for a PvP situation is because we still need to be casting our heals regularly. And because we're discipline spec'd, we don't have much in terms of flat healing benefits. Looking at the discipline tree, Power Infusion is still our big go-to spell here. You may be a hybrid class, but remember that you're going to tend to want to find a mage and give it to them. Especially if you can find a mage going Palm Pyro. They will absolutely love you. Looking at the rest of the tree, we only see we lose 1 talent in Force of Will. From those 5, we get to pick up Martyrdom, Improved Fire, and Improved Mana Burn. Well, that wraps up our talent builds videos, everybody. I hope you guys enjoyed them as much as I have had creating them. And if you did like all this content, make sure you hit that subscribe button because we will be coming out with more content for Classic WoW. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Hey, it's Radit here. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe as well. It really helps out the channel. We put out multiple new videos each week, and we appreciate all of your support. Thanks for watching, everyone, and cheers.